The panel is on Nepal-China BRI Agreement Sectoral Perspectives. On our panel, we have Mr. Purushottam Ojha. Mr. Purushottam Ojha is the former Commerce Secretary for the Government of Nepal. He has served for almost 14 years in the Ministry of Commerce in senior positions of Joint Secretary and Secretary, and has also mentored the team of experts in the formulation of Trade Policy 2009 and the Nepal Trade Integration Strategy 2010. He has led the Nepalese team in bilateral negotiations with India, Bangladesh, China, and the United States of America. He has led the nation in negotiating the bilateral trade and transit agreements with China. He has done his Masters in Public Administration from Tribhuvan University, Nepal, and has published a number of articles, research papers on the economic issues, especially on trade, transport, and investment. Next, we have Mr. Akhilesh Updhayay. Mr. Akhilesh Updhayay is a senior fellow at IIDS and former chief editor of the Kathmandu Post, Nepal's leading English language newspaper. He has 30 years of experience as political analyst and newspaper editor. He has written extensively on domestic politics, South Asian regionalism, and the rise of China and India. Mr. Updhayay has also written for major international publications including the New York Times, Indian Express, the Hindustan Times, and Outlook. Next we have Ms. Shreeya Rana. Ms. Shreeya Rana is currently the program manager at Policy Enterprises Entrepreneurs Inc. PEI. She has been part of research assignments ranging across PEI's sectoral engagements on renewable energy reform, infrastructure development and diplomacy, federalism, and natural resources. Ms. Rana has a master's degree in energy planning, policy, and economics from the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand, and a bachelor's degree in economics from Christ University, India. Next, we have Dr. Rupak Sapkota. Dr. Rupak Sapkota is currently the visiting research scholar at China West Normal University. He served as the former Deputy Executive Director of Institute of Foreign Affairs, IFA. He has received his doctorate degree in International Relations from the Renmin University. He has been actively involved in the research activities in China and South Asian issues covering the security studies, geopolitical studies, small and great power relations, governance and development studies, strategic studies of China-India-Nepal relations, and the idea of trilateralism among these countries and about the BRI. To moderate this panel, I would like to welcome Mr. Amish Raj Mulmi. Mr. Amish Raj Mulmi is the author of All Roads Lead North, Nepal's Turn to China. He has contributed to international and national media like Al Jazeera, Roads and Kingdom, Himal South Asia, India Today, the Kathmandu Post, and The Record. He is a consulting editor at Writer's Side Literacy Agency. He has also worked for Juggernaut Books and Hachette India. He has been a columnist in the Kathmandu Post since 2018. I would like to welcome all our guests who are already on stage, so the stage is for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ankita. Thank you, CESIF. And welcome to this, what I am expecting to be a very interesting session, even though it's pretty late in the day and you guys have heard over the course of the day quite a few distinguished speakers talk about BRI and all its, not just in its silo as a, let's say, instrument of geopolitics or instrument of, let's say, infrastructure development, but also as an instrument of larger engagement on multiple levels of governance, on economy, on connectivity. We've also seen that Nepal has already been perceived as a BRI beneficiary, as in one of the presentations suggested in the morning. But it's interesting to note that the scale of investments in Nepal is much, much lesser, at least the scale of Chinese investments in Nepal is much, much lesser than the rest of South Asia. If I remember correctly, there was a figure, 8 data had this figure that said between 2000 to 2017, China had invested about $2 to $3 billion in Nepal, whereas in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, the figures were at least 3 to 4 times higher. So what all have we been talking about through the day? The first is economic viability in the selection of BRI projects. The second is the current slowdown, both on the part of Nepal as well as on the part of China. And the third is whether there will be a course correction again, now that there's a new government coming in Nepal. So what will happen from Nepal's side and what will happen from China's side, considering all the talk we've been doing about interest rates, debt repayments, things like that. So without further ado, I have a stellar panel here. I'm going to start from Akhilesh. I would like to ask you, what is the BRI's current view from the Global South's perspective and from Nepal's perspective? In particular, how have these countries seen and viewed the BRI, and is Nepal's view aligned with how the rest of the world views the BRI?
Sorry about that. Amish and CESIF, thank you, BJG, first of all, for this, what has been actually already a very thought-provoking discussion the whole day. Let me break it down to some of the things that Amish has asked. And also, listening to everyone today has also been a very humbling process. I say that in the context that BRI itself is a dynamic. A lot of us have said, including today, that what are under the BRI projects? I think China has floated this concept broadly, which it expects to evolve over time. Probably my fellow panelist, Rupak will expand on this. From the global South perspective, as Amish's question was, BRI is a potential windfall for the global South, potential, I qualify, because for the global South, infrastructure, investment in infrastructure always has been a major issue. And let me rewind a bit and say a few backgrounders so that you will begin to understand what I'm trying to emphasize. First of all, in recent years, I saw the Indian or New Delhi's, how would I put it, anxiety to work closely with Nepal, which came after the blockade, by the way, when New Delhi saw that Nepal-India ties had seen a new low. So in that respect, we are in a sweet spot. Now, as far as BRI is concerned, do not forget that Nepal hasn't started any BRI project yet. And because we already have lessons from countries like Sri Lanka, as our colleague just mentioned, we have lessons to learn how an avaricious government or a corrupt government, but also donor that's like too keen to quickly loan, you know. So those lessons are there for us to take. And because we haven't started our BRI projects, with all the talk, Nepal signed in 2017, BRI inception started in 2013, it hasn't really taken off. Yes, we can forever worry and then speculate about what happened, but I also look at a very positive thing as far as Nepal goes. One, there is a need for funding, which is not going to go away. This is going to stay. Two, we also have lessons from countries like Sri Lanka. Then we can also talk about, you know, the massive BRI project not too far in Pakistan. And these things, and then there's a global literature and experience that's been gathered now that we can take a lesson from. So in that respect, I would like to turn it around completely and say, Nepal perhaps need not worry too much because we are in that global sweet spot where we can then begin to demand of our political leadership, but also China. Okay, we need the aid, but where is the transparency? We need the money. What are the conditionalities of repayment? And how long is the period for that? You know, is it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And don't forget, among the 5 BRI tools, one is a grant. One is actually a grant. Though it's a minuscule of it, maybe we can tell China, we need grant more. And then many of these big infrastructure projects, there are a combination of these. Some are just grants, some are just loans, some are big commercial loans. Maybe you could ask China, or maybe it's a leverage. China needs us as much as we do. Don't forget, it's a globalized world. And then for many things, I'll probably explain later. We need China as much as China needs us. So because we are in that global sweet spot now, maybe we should tell our political leadership, but also China, that A, B, C should be met before we get the loans, or we need more grants than the loans.
Thank you. Rupakji, I want to come to you and taking a cue from Akhilesh's point about how China, BRI is still under initiative that is under evolution, right? Like it keeps evolving. So how has China viewed the BRI in Nepal particularly, like, or its economic engagement so far?
Thank you, Amish ji. Thank you, Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism, Ambassador Karna, for this opportunity. While talking about the Chinese perspective, through the Chinese perspective of the evolution of the Belt and Road Initiative, from the time of launch in 2030, we need to go back on the geopolitical landscape of 2012, 2013. That how China perceived the world and how world perceived China. I think we should not forget about the Akhilesh just mentioned about the global south. There were lots of countries, those who saw China as an opportunity to have an economic development or as an alternative of development, economic development. And there was, at the same time, there was a perception of trade, the rise of the China as a trade. So, but very interestingly, there wasn't such a geopolitical rivalry between the great powers, because the policy from Obama administration, the pivot to Asia, was little bit confusing how to deal or how to make a relation or deal with China, whether to engage or to contain. There was some sort of confusion on that policy. So, United States especially, the leading power of this existing world order, was in the same as a dual strategy to engage with China. In most of the aspects, there was a cooperation, and some of the area there was a competition also. But from 2017 to the date, we are witnessing lots of changes in geopolitical terms. So there is a perception from United States that China is a threat for the world order, not only for the neighbors, not only for the particular country, but for the liberal world order. So this narrative has been dominant in the current geopolitical landscape. So China has a dual strategy, I think, in current time, tackling with this geopolitical changing landscape. Dual strategy, China till the date never challenged the US-led world order, want to cooperate with China, but while cooperating with United States, China wants to maximize its interest in terms of industrial benefit, in terms of technological benefits, and but China is much cautious about another strategy, the second strategy. China doesn't want to provoke or want to get involved in the confrontation with the United States. As we refer the recent Russia-Ukraine war, I think China is more cautious in that sense also. So what China is doing is China is trying to convert or make more aggressive in terms of defending anti-Chinese activities or anti-Chinese information, or this is not a new thing, but China at the same time is advocating the new world order, cooperating with, especially with Russia and the emerging economy like India and other countries from the south. So, in terms of changing geopolitical landscape, we can see there are lots of implications. While China, at the same time, try to create systematic institution to create the new kind of or restructuring of world order. I think this is the one fundamental things that China till the date, though there are lots of literature, those who have that China want to have some sort of confrontation or regional hegemony or try to contain the hegemony of United States. But if we see from the serious literature that comes from China, I think they still want to build the strength to and want to share or coordinate with US-led international order. The second thing, I think, in terms of the implementation of Belt and Road Initiative, China is working on policy formulation or policy adjustment throughout the time from 2013 to 2022. If we see, there was lots of presentation from distinguished speaker also and panelists also. In 2013, it was politically anchored mega project, Belt and Road Initiative. Later, 2015, China published a blueprint document. And in 2015, if you say, in the case of Nepal, Nepal wasn't featured in 2015 blueprint document. But later, in second forum of Belt and Road Initiative, there was lots of policy adjustment in terms of the criticism in Belt and Road Initiative. Suppose there was one slogan, it's called mission to action, from mission to action. And China, especially in three missions, growth promoting, re-globalization, new regionalism. That was there was lots of talk and discussion on the transparency, the sustainable growth in terms of climate, ecology, and in second forum of Belt and Road Initiative, we can see the policy adjustment in green and sustainable development for the future Belt and Road projects that need to be accommodated. So we can see lots of policy adjustment throughout the evolution of Belt and Road Initiative from 2030 to 2022.
Thank you, Rupak. I think that's right. Like, I mean, we tend to view sort of BRI, China, as a sort of a static, let's say, unit. But of course, there are evolutions, there are sort of adjustments that continuously, China has also reacted to, let's say, global developments. We'll come back to that, but I want to go to a more specific, let's say, idea, and I want to go to Purushottam ji over here and ask him a specific question, which is that will the implementation of BRI in Nepal expand Nepal's trade with China? And I know you've done a lot of work on, let's say, like trade, but specifically looking at this, do you think BRI implementation will expand trade with China or not in Nepal?
Thank you, Amish. Thank you, CESIF, for organizing this event. Of course, in the BRI agreement that Nepal has signed in 2017, there are provisions for free trade agreement, joint study for free trade agreement. That is one of the components mentioned in the agreement itself. Sorry. What I think that as of today, if you see some of the figures, I had brought out some figure as well, trade between Nepal and China. It is highly skewed in favor of China. So, if you look at the trade figure of 11-12, 3.3%, more than 3% of our export used to go to China. And now, the last year's figure, it is 0.03%. Very, very minimal. That means we have lost our export volume to China, but we are getting more and more import from China. Of course, if you see the trade figure of last year, even despite the COVID-19, the import from China has increased tremendously, maybe due to the medical supplies or all these things. So, one of the concepts laid in the BRI agreement was that having free trade agreement would enhance benefits on both sides of the board of Nepal and China. But what I see that fundamentally, in order to go on free trade agreement, we should be considering two criteria. One should be the justification for having a free trade area between the two countries or among the countries, among several countries. One is that there should be abundance of the goods, but they are not getting easily to the market of the other side due to several barriers. Abundance of goods availability, and second should be the barriers in the market entry. So if you see the Nepalese trade with China from these two perspectives, we don't have sufficient goods to export. That is the problem that we are having. But at the same time, we have a lot of non-tariff barriers, even the tariff barriers in export to China. So, if we, in this situation, whereas we have very, very big trade imbalance, if we go on having the free trade area agreement, of course, Nepal would be a net loser, and China would be the net. Again, their export to Nepal will go leap and bound. So we have to see this reality. And I think based on this consideration, the Nepalese authorities, they have not gone far beyond for negotiating free trade area agreement. I think it is lying, of course, underneath. It is something like that. What I see that our challenges today is to get the implementation of various agreements, trade-related agreements concluded with China during the past years, several years. If you see the list of trade agreement and trade-related agreements with China, I have counted 9. Since 1981, we have the trade and payment agreement, transport agreement, trade-related agreement, trade facilitation agreement. So several agreements are there. But the challenge is there for implementation of this provision. Someone in the previous session has said that implementation is there is agreement, but the agreement is not implemented. That is also a kind of systemic problem. And this kind of problem is not only with China, it is also with India as well. We conclude agreement, bilateral agreement, but in the reality it is not implemented. That is the problem that we are facing. So I think if you see the text of the agreement, you can see that all the barriers, say for example, we have concluded zero tariff preferences agreement with China back in 2010. During that time, they provided duty-free zero tariff preferences to nearly 4,700 products in six-digit customs, six-digit level. And after that, in 2014, another agreement was signed that added the product to 8,000 from 4,700. But even after that, you see the export could not develop. Export could not go up, and rather it was going down. So I think there is a need of soul searching, reflecting all these things. Why having several agreements, several provisions in the agreement, the trade, the complementarity is not there. And Nepal has been a great loser in bilateral trade with India. So in order to move forward, what I see that we have to focus on implementation of the agreement that has been concluded in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Purushottam. Quite a few questions over there, but I want to first do one round. So, Shreeya, I know that you've done a lot of work on, let's say, infrastructure, like multilateral and bilateral infrastructure here in Nepal. So, just give us a sense, in the morning, Prashanti and Saurabh both gave us a sense of, let's say, BRI's experience in Nepal. But I want to get a sense of what Nepal's experience has been with Chinese investments in infrastructure in particular. Of course, historically we know that there has been several aid projects. There's been the Lhasa-Kathmandu road, there's been the Pokhara-Kathmandu highway as well, Pokhara-Bangalore highways. So, but in recent, let's say, I would call it post in the Xi Jinping era, right? What has been Nepal's experience with Chinese investments in infrastructure?
Thanks for the question. I think in the recent years, one big difference is that China wants to do aid through concessional loans, whereas Nepal's position is that it still wants grants. That's, I think, one of the reasons why BRI is at the state that it is in. And I think what we need to understand is now that there is a shift in the paradigm and there's a shift in modality of aid. And if you look at how we started aid in the early 60s, 70s, most of what we got was through aid, and there wasn't much to lose at that point. I mean, there were some implications, of course there were negotiations, there were trade-offs, but that wasn't a time when aid was driven by market conditions. Now aid is driven by market conditions, and if it is not a viable option, it's not just China, it's any other country who's investing in another country. It's looking for its own economic opportunities. And in the absence of that, I think that's where those countries are taking a step back and making its own decisions. And it's time for Nepal to step up and decide for itself and set up its own priorities and set up its own goals and agendas, and then negotiate at a position where you can establish your own demands and establish what those infrastructure projects are that is going to be economically viable, that is going to be environmentally viable, that is going to actually improve your domestic conditions rather than just sit and wait for these projects to fall into our wish list. So I think that is one major difference, which is market-led conditions at this point.
Thank you. I just want to continue on that. So yes, aid is driven by market conditions in the modern day, right? It's very different from, let's say, post-Second World War, that's the situation. But in particular, do you see the similar trend with China, how China has approached its aid in the modern day as well? And is it any different from, let's say, how Japan does it, or how, let's say, other countries are doing it?
I think with China, it's more open, out in the open, that it has some vested interest, whereas for the rest of the countries, it's not portrayed like that. Still, Western donors are perceived to be benevolent donors, whereas China is supposed to be this predatory donor. So I think we need to understand that for all countries, there's always been some element of tied conditionalities which weren't as prominent or as prominently discussed in public forums as Chinese aid is. For instance, if you look at Japanese aid, it is tied to the fact that you want your contractors building those projects. It is similar for aid from China. It's similar for aid from India. They want their construction materials coming into your country when they've provided aid for you. So I think that a lot of this Western-driven narrative is pushing this whole image of China in Nepal. If you look closely and if you actually look at how some of the negotiations happened with other countries, like the infrastructure with other countries, you would see similar trends. That element of tight conditionalities that's present across all.
I suppose the key issue is also the lessons that, let's say, we're learning from Sri Lanka, the lessons we're learning from Kenya, or let's say Laos and the other places where, and Pakistan, where suddenly this idea of the paying back the interest rates, the paying back of this high debt to GDP ratio is really, let's say, matching up. I want to come to Rupakji and I want to ask him the other side, which is, of course, I mean, China is lending out this money and it expects to get it back, right? But so how is China, let's say, what is the literature in China saying about this interest rate backlash that it's receiving from across the world? You know, in particular, let's say, like, I mean, is it sort of making China think about BRI again? Is it sort of, like you said, is it making China adjust its BRI policies?
While talking about the interest rate for Belt and Road Initiative project, there are very few literature in China also. As we heard from lots of speakers, that Belt and Road Initiative has its one, not a universal policy. It has different country to country. It has different policy document, or the MOU are the same, but there are some differences in the interest rate also. But we can see from the data that in terms of politics or overall growth or the success of Belt and Road Initiative, through the Belt and Road Initiative in China, the participation, the number of the countries from all over the world, we all know that 140 countries already signed MOU, and other 32 international organizations from different, most of them are economic organizations. If we see from the investment, from the FDI aspect, we can see in 2012, China outbound foreign direct investment was only 82 billion US dollar. But in 2020, it was 154 billion, ranked as a world #1 overseas investor. This increase in China investment and Belt and Road Initiative countries has also seen very impressive. So, in the recent, after I think 2019, there has been lots of concern from developing countries, especially from Africa, Asia, after the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, especially lots of countries, those who were much enthusiastic in the beginning phase of Belt and Road Initiative, they are much cautious about the Chinese Belt and Road project in terms of lending the money from Belt and Road Initiative, AIIB or Exim Bank. So it's a concern among the scholars inside China also. And some of the region in Africa, I'm not sure the country, but there are some countries, those they have been negotiating to exclude or to give concession for the loan, and there has been some successful stories that China has expanded the time and even some sort of loan also in Africa. So I think we are in the phase of in 2022 and 2023 will be the 10th anniversary of Belt and Road Initiative. As Professor Shrikant sir has already mentioned, China is planning to organize another third Belt and Road Initiative International Forum. By going through the literature from Chinese scholar, I can see that there can be some policy adjustment in terms of higher rate and to adjust with other international economic organization or financial organization in the future.
Thank you, Rupakji. So now I want to bring the question back to Akhilesh and Shreeya, both of you. This is more regarding Nepal-specific dilemmas, right? Like, I mean, it's been 5 years, and up till 2019, there was this upsurge in narrative about China in Nepal. There was an investment started to bring, and suddenly post the pandemic, we've seen, of course, the pandemic is a black swan event, but we've also seen, as let's say, a completely different slowdown. We've seen, let's say, there's a backlash, of course, from the US, there's Sri Lanka. But from the Nepali perspective, Shreeya, for you, I will ask you, what are Nepal's dilemmas vis-a-vis BRI, particularly with respect to the economic side of things? And Akhilesh, what are Nepal's dilemmas with BRI on the political and the geopolitical side? So, up to you. Decide whoever wants to go first.
Thank you. Like I said, it is still an economic decision. For instance, if a lot of investment comes in the energy sector from China, where is our market? As long as India decides that it's not going to buy energy from any sort of Chinese connection to a power project, it's not going to buy our energy. So it is still market driven for us. It is still driven by the fact that it's going to cost a lot of money, and are we ever going to recuperate it? If you take the example of the Pokhara International Airport right now, the financial viability is just being questioned after it's completed. It's only being questioned right now. The reason such a project even came about, that's being questioned after it's been completed. So where is our due diligence? These are things that you need to think about before you set out your wish list, like I said. Before you set out, we're not in a time where we just like demand for things. We are equally partners in this cooperation. It's not just donor driven, it is an economic cooperation, and we want returns, and so do our economic partners. So I think as long as there is a market for whatever projects are being developed, there is a viability, economic, financial viability to a project, then it makes sense. But beyond that, I think still being bogged down by the old narrative of just a geopolitical dilemma, I think we need to move forward from that, and we need to look into more practical consideration, because it seems like that those are the considerations of China at this point.
Okay, I'll add another point to that, what Shreeya just said about, yes, of course, market conditionalities are obviously always there, right? But within this larger geopolitical and internal political dilemma about projects, about BRI, how can Nepal also negotiate, let's say, this Indian condition of purchasing power only from companies that do not have any, let's say, Chinese investment in it?
As much like we'd like to think that it's just a economic give and take, the closest parallel I can draw back to history is Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan, of course, built Western Europe, not just Western Europe, by the way, but also Italy, for example, which was on the other side of the war, not in the Allied front, So, what did US get in return? US got allies in return that were stable democracies, but also with whom it could then build up, among others, economic ties. When you are talking about BRI, it's more than just like two companies working together for profitability. At least I have no illusion about that. This is the most ambitious foreign policy arm of an extremely ambitious leader who just got a third 5-year term and perhaps gave himself a lifetime extension. So we're talking about a massive scale here. We're not just talking about just two companies doing business and then let's just talk about profitability. Now, what does that bring in Nepal? First of all, I like some of the things that discussed here. We are a democracy. Let's not forget that. So, do our values align with China? While in our process of getting aid from them, are we trying to kind of compromise with certain values as, say, for example, human rights, say, ethnic rights, which have become intrinsic value system of a democracy that we built in. Aid is fine, money is fine, but what do these aids come with? Some of our colleagues here were discussing about tide aid, So these are things. One of them, I just was listening as I was discussing this literature. Long-term sustainability of goals are in question, especially as many participating nations struggle with debt issues and have been forced to cancel some projects or scale them down even. Okay? Now there's another claim that China is intentionally trapping some of these countries. Sri Lanka could be a classic example. That doesn't take away the fact that Sri Lanka's economy was in bad shape already. But I'm talking about externalities that came into play. So this never-ending cycle of dependency, in a country, if you could learn that grand theory of dependency, Dependency means basically there's a central lender and there are peripheral states. In a classical OECD term, say Latin America and Africa and Asian states who are the borrowers. Yeah? Did they get the benefit or did they end up becoming trapped in this aid diplomacy? So that's another major concern. Then there are other concerns too. For example, labor issues that's been raised. Have we discussed with China yet? Are we going to get, what kind of labor laws will prevail? And if the Chinese bring in their own workforce, will our economy be deprived from other multiplier effects that come into play? Yeah? Will China ask us, that's something that China has done, it's a proven empirical studied literature there, that certain countries that China gives aid to, China also expects politics in return. Please do not talk about this issue. Do not talk about Tibet. Do not talk about Taiwan. Now these are like fundamentals of a democracy. It's our call to decide where do we want to go. Just in terms of getting money, are we trying to compromise with the fundamentals that our society is built on? Or is there another way out so that we get the money all right, but we also stick to certain ideas that we are built on? So in that respect, I think, at least integrated region South Asia is, we also have some commonality, I think. Another point, yeah, your earlier question, and this also deals with this one, that then why still the attraction for the South, the global South, for Chinese money? You know, it's because the private money that would have otherwise come from Western private loans are deemed to be costly, but also they also come with ties. Let's not forget. There's no free lunch here. You know, oftentimes we talk about diplomacy as if like someone's giving us free lunch. There's no free lunch. We got to get over this. China will, you know, also exact some prices for giving the money out. Something that I said in my first remarks when I came in was, Nepal, when I say we, Nepal, we are in a soft spot of time because we have had already literature of some of the loans gone bad vis-a-vis BRI. Sri Lanka is a classic example. So can we avoid those mistakes? Can we openly discuss with Chinese, yes, we need your money, but here are our conditionalities too. And do not forget, you know, and oftentimes like we as a small state, you know, someone had a question, General had a brilliant question about small state perspective. Because we are small states, we need rules-based order even more. Otherwise, some regimes in China, but also some governments in Nepal, could do some under-the-table deal. We need transparency. We need to, the people who are accountable in the government need to tell our people, this is the best possible loan. This has been discussed. And there's the media, there's the civil society. The more it comes out, the better, you know. And perhaps there wasn't enough discussion, perhaps in the case of Sri Lanka, I don't know. I'm very keen. I've been reading some literature during the run-up to this presentation. Yeah, these are important things to ask. And let me also see, you know, because we live in a dynamic, because the threat of BRI for the other big bloc, the West, is so strong, threat or perceived threat, let's say. Then they came first with Blue Dot Network, where issues like transparency is emphasized. That's not necessarily a bad thing for me as a citizen of Global South, seriously. And it has now evolved into what they call this Build Back Better World, 3 Bs and W. You know, again, it's a build-up to Blue Dot Network. You know, just that if the Blue Dot Network only had 3 countries, this one has 7 major economies. You know, four major economies in Europe, but 3 in you know, Canada, US, and Japan. So it's not a bad thing for us. As in, like, we have more the lenders, better for us. So the danger happens for a small state, especially. India can perhaps declare, oh, we don't need your money. We are already the 6th largest economy in the world, destined to be 3rd. US will come back to our doorstep because US needs us as much. We as small states, Nepal, Sri Lanka, to some extent Bangladesh, though Bangladesh is roaring pretty well economically. We need that, we need the money, but we also need to, you know, play it hardball. The negotiations should come into play and say, we are small states, but don't ask us to choose sides between the West and China. You know, we need your money. This is something I was asked at a BRI conference in Beijing. You know, this is after Nepal signed, a year after Nepal signed BRI. I mean, naturally, all countries think that their money is more holier than others' money. And I said, all the money is the same. To Nepal, whether it's American money or Chinese money or ADB money or whatever money, give us the best payback time and give us the softest loan possible. And if you can, give us a grant. We do not have a choice. We will take it, but what we have a choice is between you. You know, Indians also have this thing saying that, oh, our money is holier than Chinese money. Americans tell the same. You know, Chinese tell the same. For us, as a small state, I mean, hear me out, please. The best bargain possible. You know, and the more lenders there are, we have that much choice to exercise our sovereign authority.
I think that's a very interesting point. There are two points that I think, Lisa, you made. The first is obviously The Chinese money is filling the void of, let's say, other nations, the void that they left in terms of aid dependency, in terms of the aid cycles, the loan cycles that they were giving out. And it's very interesting to see this, particularly in Africa, where Western investments really declined, and that's where China came in and filled the void, literally. And the second point is about smaller states and their bargaining power as well. And that is something that smaller states agency, that is something that we don't talk enough about. And I want to come to Purushottam ji on this, because you've been in government, and you say that yes, we've done 9 trade agreements since 1981, and I believe our trade agreement with China pretty much covers 98% of zero tariff for 98% of goods. So, but what is stopping Nepal, number one, from implementing these trade agreements, right? Is it non-tariff barriers, or is it more? And number two, what can be done in government to, let's say, build up our own negotiating power to say, to not just tell China, but to tell other bilateral lenders, other multilateral lenders that, all right, this is a project we want, you fund us for this project on our terms.
Thank you, Amish. Of course, we have hit the right point that despite that it is around 96%, not 98% tariff line. On the tariff line, preferential market access facility is given to Nepal. But this excludes the key Nepalese product. That is there. The one of the points is that key exportable products are excluded out of the list. That is one of the reasons. And second, it is prevalence of non-tariff barrier, particularly related with SPS, quarantine, food taste, product standards, and even border problem. You see the two borders, they were operating over the last few years, but after COVID, both of these borders, the coast of Tatopani and Kerum, Rasuagali, it has been almost closed, and there is no movement of the goods through the border. That is also one of the reasons, because most of our export goes to Tibet autonomous region, while import comes from mainland. And the export to mainland is very, very minimal, negligible. So the border problems, of course, the border closures, border post closures has an impact on export of Nepalese goods. And another thing is related with connectivity. Of course, the connectivity, we have 6 border posts with Tibet, China, right from east to west. But out of these 2 border posts, only 2 are approached by motor vehicle. That is Kerum and Thatopani, which is also closed right at the moment, and it is sometime opened on the, you see, according to the discretion of the customs officials on the Chinese side, that is there. And rest of the 4 border posts, they are not connected with the motorable motorable service. On the other side it is there, but on the Nepalese side the motorable vehicle doesn't. So we have talked about transport connectivity and trans-Himalayan connectivity, trans-Himalayan transport corridor, economic corridor. If you see the agreement, just I have mentioned before this, these agreements talks about this trans-Himalayan transport corridor, but in implementation it is not happening at all. For example, there is one agreement, there is still one agreement effective signed back in 1994. According to that, that is the transport agreement. That transport agreement allows the movement of Nepalese vehicle up to Lhasa and the Tibetan vehicle up to Kathmandu, but we are not seeing any movement as such.
Purushottam, I'll just interrupt you. I would like to ask, what exactly is stopping us from implementing these agreements?
Yeah, of course, implementation, it is actually what I see that the main issue is the non-implementation of the provisions of the agreement. Several agreements we have signed, but it has not been implemented it has not come into action. So what I see that another point maybe some deficiency on our part as well in order to push the things with the Chinese authority. For example, we have 5 diplomatic mission stationed in China: Beijing, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Lhasa, and Chengdu. So nowhere in other countries we have such a large number of missions. But still, I am wondering why our missions are not so effective in order to address all these issues. Because we have issues in market access, and of course one of it is not the picture is always not gloomy. There is some light in the end of the tunnel. What I see that over the last few years we have seen a lot of Chinese investment coming into Nepal. So almost 1 decade before, India was the #1 investor in Nepal, but now China has already surpassed it. And the 52% of Nepalese foreign investment in Nepal comes from China. China as well as Hong Kong and Taiwan is if you treat it as one country. But most of the investment from China, they are on the services sector, like yes, hotel, restaurant, cargo service, like that. So we have to ask more Chinese investment in the manufacturing sector, where the goods can be produced and those produced goods can be taken back to China is Nepalese. So these are some of the areas that we have to look at. And of course, another area what I see that this consultation mechanism. Under various agreements, we have the consultation mechanism, secretary level, joint secretary level, several tiers of consultation mechanism are there, but it is not functioning very well. That is what I experienced. Thank you.
I suppose the key is, like Akhilesh said, and as a state, we need to believe, firstly, that we have agency, and secondly, that we have the capability to execute and demand what we want as a state from, let's say, lenders, right? I'm going to come to the last round, and I believe I have about like 6-7 minutes. So one more round, I'll go. Just please keep it short. Simple question. Road ahead. What can we expect in terms of BRI implementation, in terms of, let's say, while in BRI implementation in Nepal, while this US-China contest is going on, while India-China contest is going on, the Indo-Pacific is picking up. So I'll go from this side, just a short thing. Rupakji, how do you see BRI being implemented from here on in Nepal?
First, we should not forget about the national imperatives to join Belt and Road Initiative from Nepal side. That after the new constitution, we face blockade from our southern neighbor, so it triggered Nepal to open up or to cooperate with China in terms of economic partnership. So there has been several dozens of agreements that already mentioned by our previous speaker also, panelists also. Even we had built one framework to work or to expedite our cooperation on Belt and Road Initiative. It's called Trans-Himalayan Multidimensional Connectivity Network. So it's a framework. We have already the framework to work with China to promote the Belt and Road Initiative cooperation. The thing is, we are reluctant, or is a policy, how to say, so order, neither China or Nepal, they haven't entered into the policy order or hierarchy how to execute the Belt and Road Initiative projects in Nepal.
in this political order, we can discuss about the financial morality, or we can discuss about the mechanism, institutional mechanism, and even we need to have a implementation plan. I think we all are aware about the implementation plan that has been forwarded by Chinese side during the visit of Wang Yi before several months ago. I think Nepal need to discuss on that implementation plan to how to execute, or because in the previous session also, our former minister also, foreign minister also mentioned about these prospect projects that Nepal has proposed to China. So I think in this space, while talking about the policy formulation, I think we need to discuss on the implementation plan of Belt and Road Initiative. We need to take an example, because there are lots of relations from worldwide, especially from South Asian countries, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Maldives. So from those experience, relations, we can have a better negotiation with China to go forward. I think one of the major things I think we need to discuss, we need to start to discuss on the implementation plan of Belt and Road Initiative, covering with the financial morality, covering the mechanism, need to authorize the one particular institution or need to form a new authority or the mechanism. I think that can be in the process of discussion. And second, I think most important thing is the Belt and Road Initiative projects in Nepal. We should not undermine the geopolitical changes. The power balance in South Asia, the regional power balance has been shifted, and the traditional power balance has overwhelmingly challenged by the presence of great powers. So the Indian reservation on Belt and Road Initiative and the growing convergence of US and India is another factor in I think the foremost challenge to go ahead or to implement or to execute Belt and Road Initiative. So this is not beyond our capacity, but I think we need to consider this Indian reservation and growing convergence between major powers in the region, so we can execute Belt and Road Initiative projects in Nepal.
Sorry. Thank you, Rupakji. Sorry I had to cut you down, but I just want to give everyone a chance. Purushottamji, simple question. BRI implementation, let's assume it goes ahead. Can we reduce the trade deficit with China or not? Can we reduce the trade deficit with China?
Yeah,
of
course. I have even spoken before this. We can reduce trade deficit. The first thing is to have the products of the goods and services. That is far most important. Until and unless we have our one goods and services, we cannot export it. That is number one. Second is the transport connectivity. That is very much important for us to trade with China over the land border restrictions. Third is the non-tariff barrier. Several non-tariff barriers still exist in the export of Nepalese goods. So limited goods that we are exporting as of today is also facing a lot of non-tariff barrier related problems. SPS, quarantine, food test, product standards. There are several, even the language barrier. There are several barriers related to that. So, and another is enhancing the dialogue, just dialogue and consultation process. Since I have already spoken about it, that we have several mechanisms, and we have to talk openly. We are not achieving the target of the agreement or the MOU we have signed bilaterally. And what are the bottlenecks on it? How should we move ahead? and how to achieve the target that we have signed or that we have agreed to our MOU or the agreement. This thing has to be openly discussed and debated with the Chinese authority. And even I have in the past suggested that let the government authorities and the business community sit together and find out the ways and means how we create complementarity on trade and economy between the two countries. We are so close to the borders, but still, you see, our trade hasn't been built up, and although we have some a positive sign of increasing investment from China, even the investment is not that much. There are few investment in cement and hydropower industry, but we can have more investment from China on manufacturing sector, and those products could be exported back to China. So these are some of the areas that we have to look at.
Thank you, Purushottam ji. Shreeya, similar question, but in terms of infrastructure. Chinese investments in infrastructure, do you see them growing? Do you see Nepal sort of like going more for Chinese investment in infrastructure? What is the future?
Like, okay, so there is an increase in Chinese FDI, as Purushottam sir just mentioned. There is, of course, an increase in Chinese movement in Nepal at this point, but I see more movement in the service sector rather than the infrastructure sector. If you look at the actual number of aid disbursements that actually come through China. So I actually wanted to respond to the BRI question also because I had it framed in my mind. Yeah. So I want to actually take a step back and first rethink what BRI means in Nepal. Like, what are the projects we are considering are under BRI? Any project that has an element of connectivity, has an element of energy, are those being repackaged as BRI? Where is the clarity from our side? I think this is where we need to start before we discuss how to move forward. So that was short.
Akhilesh, I'll give you the last word. The political side, I want to know specifically from the political side, internal, let's say, dynamics of Nepal. What now for China and Nepal from here on?
I mean, again, I want to turn the whole conversation around and say we again sit at a sweet spot in the sense that we're going to have a government soon. Yeah? New government is always an opportunity to start anew, you know. And one of the things I would like the new government to take up is don't approach China random. Someone wants Madan Bhandari Institute. Someone wants a theme park in Daman, you know, and someone wants special economic zone in Chitwan. You know the characters I'm talking about. Now you need to also win the confidence of a party that you want to do business with, you know. So our institutional memory and institutional mechanism, to say the least, has been very random, ad hoc. And it doesn't inspire much confidence in a lender, you know. And another thing, yes, BRI projects have been whittled down from 35 to 9, but that means nothing. We have the opportunity to start afresh with some of the things I mentioned earlier and the fellow panelists too, that we have the power and national agency to bargain to the best we can. And the worst case scenario, we don't take it. We don't have to take it Hammantata port. That will only invite twins, nothing else. You know, and I would like to appeal everyone, especially our political class, the airport in itself, the highway in itself, attractive building in itself, they are not developments. Developments are sustainability. What do you make of that? You know, we've been sold too long these dreams that, oh, we have a grand highway, grand airport. Look at the Gautam Buddha International Airport. Hardly any plane lands. So what do we do with these white elephants? So we have to come down from the high horse that development of a country is sustainability. And we also, on a very last note, we also have to be careful about any donors exacting a political price on us. Okay, we'll give you this money, but you cannot do this. You cannot take a political position on this. You cannot take a democratic position on this. You know, I'm not just talking about China, also with India, our other closest neighbor, but also Western partners. So we have to be careful with that. On a last note, I will tell everyone that start your development humble. Don't look at these grand white elephants, just start humble and then develop the institutional memory mechanism. We still have a long way to go.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. I have time for three questions at the most. But I think what Akhilesh was saying is very interesting because a long time ago I heard someone from the tourism department simply tell me that we'll build homestays and tourists will come. So I think you're thinking about infrastructure along those lines. I have time for, yes, three questions? Three questions? Okay, three questions. All right, so I have two here and then third then.
Thank you. My small query to Mr. Purushottam Ojha. Since you talked about Nepal-China boundary as well, I guess Nepal will be connected to China's BRI sooner or later. There is no doubt. Most probably, China's Kerung will be connected to Roswagari of Nepal under BRI connectivity. But Kerung Roswagari or Hasa Kodari crossing points have been obstructed time and often. Just for example, it was opened just before the Dasai festival. Since you are a trade and transit analyst, my query to you is, what did obstruction make an impact on trade and transit treaty between Nepal and China? Thank you.
The other day I was discussing with Akhilesh about the prospect and the projects under the BRI in Nepal. When communist government was in Nepal, when NCP was there, NCP government was there led by KP Sharma Oli, that was a very high momentum to Nepal to accelerate the projects on the BRI because they had a mandate of almost 2/3 majority in government. And Prime Minister KP Oli, he read out 35 projects to his Chinese counterpart. And the Chinese, they suggested, oh man, this is a huge, long, you cannot afford all this kind of things. We also cannot afford all these projects. So, trimmed down to single digit, then the Nepali side is trimmed down to 9 projects. Now, 9, they selected the 9. And we don't know what the status of the 9 projects, either these are done by the Prime Minister or Finance Ministry officials. And now, if you go and ask the Finance Ministry, you don't have record of these 9 projects. The interesting thing is, in our experience is that we started, become the part of the BRI from 2014 by signing the Sectoral Fund. Then this is the genesis of our journey towards the BRI, then the OBOR, then the AIIB, then the BRI. Okay. So the thing is that in 2019, during the second BRI conference in China, our president was there, and China included the Himalayan multidimensional connectivity network in the prioritization under the BRI. But when our leaders they returned from from China and we listed the multidimensional connectivity, it's not only the railway project, it is multidimensional connectivity means it's a rail, it's a road, it's a tunnel, it's everything.
What is the question, please?
And he said we talk about the policy harmonization and the PPI, our project implementation plan. So tell me one thing. President Vidya Bhandari, she pushes for Madan Bhandari University. APOD pushes for industrial park in Damak. Mr. Purushottam Ojha pushes for industrial park in Chitwan. Okay. And now Deoba government wants to do some projects with a limited kind of geopolitical significance on the BRI. This is the position. So, and there is, as you say, there is a proposal for the project implementation plan.
So the question is,
and there is also a proposal from Chinese side when there is NCP government to form a high-level executive committee under the BRI, either led by President or Prime Minister or Foreign Minister or whatever. But that couldn't happen. these all disasters happened during the tenure of NCP or Communist Party government in Nepal. So when the Communist Party were ruling in the country and BRI went into back burner, the back foot. So in next year, the China is organizing the third BRI conference. So what would be the Nepal's position? Will we select the projects under the individual consensus or individual priority, or it would be a national priority and national consensus? What would be the priority for Nepal?
So what is Nepal's priority? Is it going to select PRI?
Border from Bhutan was opened in 11th century. Now after from last 10 years, it's almost closed to go from Uray Lake, Bhanjang to Kailash or Manas River. Like we are talking about Chinese trade. What makes Tatopani closed without declaring Nakabandi with Nepal? Because you are from you are China expert, you are from Sindhu Palchok. So this is my question: is it related with BRI? Because Nepal is related with BRI, that's why, or is what is the cause?
Our expectation was to reducing the India's transit routes and our third country goods from China to Kathmandu. So, 8 not single truck, and we have signed protocol in 2018, but 8 not able to import transit any goods from that. So what led there? Actually, we have a lot of discussion with you, I remember, in our office and many places, but I would like to know that, can you explain that what it is, why it is not happening? And second to Dr. Akhilesh, as you said that our institutions, our nation, our leadership has to think, have a very serious thing that how the countries are playing with the differences of the different institutions. Recently, our President, Vidya Bhandari, besides the Prime Minister office and Foreign Minister, negative or not to join, President had joined the GSI, the City of Design. So in this context, what we found that differences of different institutions and countries at the moment are trying to play the differences. So what do you suggest to that to make the homogeneous institutional capacity, how it can be? Because that the GSI is not a small thing. It's another big security initiative by the Chinese. That was it.
Calls, because they are not very much clear about it. Because what I see that during COVID-19, the trade of China with European Union, ASEAN and USA has increased tremendously. But for such a small country, why the COVID-19 has been a obstructing factor? So it takes back the questions of transparency. So this is one of the areas even we are not very much sure. And there is one provision in the bilateral. I was talking about the implementation of the provision of the agreement. There is one memorandum signed between the government of India, government of Nepal and government of China in 2012 about the border management. It says that the border can be closed in case of emergency or in case of force majeure by giving prior notice 24 hours before such closing. And for the normal closing of the border, the contracting party has to take the permission from the other contracting party. This is clearly mentioned in the agreement, but it is not being adhered, it is not being complied. That is one of the issues about border closure. And I think the issue should be dealt, it has to be talked in the bilateral consultation or by the bilateral negotiation, and Nepal should pursue for implementation of the provisions of the agreement on bilateral, on this border issues, I mean the border post issues. Actually, there is another agreement, the same agreement, management of border post. It has also talked about improvement of the border facility, and it has also not been implemented. So these are some of the areas that we have to look at. So in respect of the questions put by Dr. Vijay, Ambassador Vijay, I have seen the transit transport agreement signed in 2016 and the protocol 2019. My observation is that the protocol is very much incomplete in the sense that we don't have any procedure and the modality for movement of the transit cargo between the port in China and the Nepal border. It all depends upon the discretion of the Chinese customs official. If the Chinese customs official say, okay, take your goods, then they can take it. So if he obstruct and he creates some problem, there is no any procedures later on the agreement. That is one of the lacuna of the agreement itself, agreement and protocol. And second, what I am telling that at least let us have that there are four sea coast or seaport, and three the land port that can be used by Nepal's transit traffic. At least let us have some pilot movement of the containerized traffic from all the way from Guangzhou to Kathmandu, and let us see what will be the cost, what will be the time required for that, and what process has to be involved. That is very much important for the traders, for the trades to move the goods in, because the nearest seaport from Nepal border to through China, it is around 3,900 kilometers. While we are the Calcutta from Nepal border, it is around 750, and Visakhapatnam is around 1,400 kilometers. So I think there is a lot of difference in the distance. So that's why we have to look at, we have to test it, we have to examine it. What will be the process? What will be the cost? What will be the time for movement of transit cargo? Because we have done it in 2015. It is an inculcation of of course, after 2015, diversification, the motive of the government of Nepal to diversify transit corridors. So we have to check its validity for movement of transit cargo for Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I will go from the second question from Tatupani. I'm not sure that I'm the right person to answer this question or not, because it's more concern about the Chinese policy. I think we all know about the Chinese policy during the COVID-19 from 2019 to just a couple of weeks ago. China's international relation has been some sort of impact because of zero-COVID policy that has implemented during the COVID period. So there has been new news that China going to end its zero-COVID policy, and the surge of new COVID infection all over the China. There has been discussions about the zero-COVID policy, its implication, success. So I think coming to the NATA, it's most about the zero-COVID policy. And the zero-COVID policy, when it was implemented, there was full responsibility for the local authority from the Chinese government. So they were much cautious about the infection from the overseas. So it led to some sort of obstacles in the border area together with other border Arunataharuma pani. And the another thing is Tatupani Naka is because of natural disaster also. There has been some sort of challenges. Last week I've been to Tatupani port, and I see the Chinese, they are working in the road also in terms of other infrastructure also. And they are preparing to open the port in the full form. I hope after this spring festival, from the march, I think there will be people movement also from Tatupani Naga and others, port also, other highways also, including Tirun port also. Another second question, first question asked by Anil Gary.
Via political.
That's the point I want to make highlighted in my previous presentation also. The political party, almost to majority government, they focus, there was a less focus on Belt and Road Initiative cooperation with China. And there was some sort of tension with India also. And there was a large discussion that was covered by MCC debate in Nepal. So the government of Nepal was largely focused on party-to-party relation, not only Communist Party, but all Nepali Congress also, other party also. And at that time there was much engagement with Communist Party of Nepal. So that was, I think, both from China also, Nepal also, there was lack of policy order or policy coordination or policy formulation in how to comprehend the challenge of Belt and Road Initiative in Nepal, how Nepal perceived Belt and Road Initiative, the prospect of Belt and Road Initiative challenge, and how to implement that. Both Nepal and China, they were far behind to understand to comprehend the real problem in the Nepal. So it was the missed opportunity for NCP during its tenure in 2018 to 2019.
Thank you, Pabji. Akhilesh, then, please keep it short.
Yeah, very short, I promise. Vijayji's question about Nepal's president's position at GSI. I mean, I came to know through the newspaper, and I would like to think, as an observer, on a security architecture as big and as significant as that, we need to have a national position. Now, that's something that I keep on hearing again and again in my, some of my visits to Beijing, but also with diplomats, Chinese here, but also Western diplomats and Indian. What is your position? We need to have an institutional position before a head of a state articulates that in an international forum. So I personally would like to think that, these statements are not randomly made by heads of governments and हाम्रा शीर्षस्थ नेताहरू पनि विभिन्न फोरममा विभिन्न कुरा बोलेर हिँड्नुहुन्छ हामी जर्नलिस्ट जसले डिफेन्डै नगर्नुपर्ने सबैलाई गाली हामीले डिफेन्ड गर्नुपर्छ बेला रफु गर्ने पनि हुन्छ रफु गर्दा गर्दै भङ्गै ठुलो भइसक्यो So in terms of that, I think we should refrain from making such a decision, such a public statement. And the president was, I think, I don't know why she said that and why she took such a position, strong, and despite the government regulations, in a country where the head of the state is ceremonial, I still don't get it. Why she hasn't said what she said. Okay.
I suppose that's one of the answers to why we don't get a lot of things what our politicians do. So at the end, I think we had a very, very interesting session. A couple of points that stood out for me were A, that Nepal needs better preparation while going ahead. B, Nepal must articulate its national position in terms of its national interest, in terms of viability of projects going ahead. And C, there has to be institutionalization of these mechanisms of the transparency in this beyond just the political relationships. And with that, I thank my panelists, I thank CESIF. This has been a most enlightening session. Thank you all for a very interesting session. Of these mechanisms of the transparency in this beyond just the political relationships. And with that, I thank my panelists, I thank CESIF. This has been a most enlightening session. Thank you all for a very interesting session. Creation of these mechanisms, of the transparency in this beyond just a political relationship. And with that, I thank my panelists, I thank CESIF. This has been a most enlightening session. Thank you all for a very interesting session. Creation of these mechanisms, of the transparency in this beyond just a political relationship. And with that, I thank my panelists, I thank CESIF. This has been a most enlightening session. Thank you all for a very interesting session. Creation of these mechanisms, of the transparency in this beyond just a political relationship. And with that, I thank my panelists, I thank CESIF. This has been a most enlightening session. Thank you all for a very interesting session. Creation of these mechanisms, of the transparency in this beyond just a political relationship. And with that, I thank my panelists, I thank CESIF. This has been a most enlightening session. Thank you all for a very interesting session. Creation of these mechanisms, of the transparency in this beyond just a political relationship. And with that, I thank my panelists, I thank CESIF. This has been a most enlightening session. Thank you all for a very interesting session.